Welcome to A Court of Transformation and Awakening. I'm Lorrie Gray.
And I'm Amanda Grace Harrison.
And in this episode, we are discussing Chapter 46, the final chapter of A Court of Thorns and Roses. Oh, friend, it's been so much fun getting to this point. Kind of bittersweet.
Right?
Last chapter.
Thank goodness we have several books left.
We have more books. Well, and we've already talked about, I'm like, I can't wait to, because knowing like the whole book, like we really wanted to do these episodes in like only talk about the chapter, only talk about to what we've seen. But then once you get to the end of the first book, I imagine we're probably going to do some episodes where I'm like, it's just going to be fun to be able to talk about, oh wait, now we know everything that happens. Yeah.
So
let's go back
and talk about that, knowing what we know now.
What we know. Okay, but so final chapter here where we wrap everything up. Now this is one of those things I have to say, I could have used a little more feel-good time.
Yes.
So many stories where it's like, okay, we got through the thing. I'm like, I need to see kind of like some happy ending here.
Yeah, like a nice long, like a few chapters.
I could use a little bit of that. But
I was doing that as I was reading the Under the Mountain. I remember the first time I'm going, there's not enough left.
There's not enough for this to
bad to end and
it's like,
wrap up, and then for me to have all that feel good feeling.
Especially because I'm like, wait, that's acknowledgments. Wait, that's a thing
that's another chapter from the next book.
That's very little.
There's so little of the feel good at the end. But
so part of the reason why we don't have that is again one of those moments where this author, why I like this author and why this is a book where I feel like we can actually do a personal transformation on it, is because it is, as we've said, she writes trauma-informed characters. They were just about died. She just murdered 2 people. Like the idea of her then being able to jump into a happy ending, as much as I want that because it would make me feel better, it wouldn't actually make sense. And the way that she writes this, it's more true. I mean, she wakes up and one of the very first things is like, she's like, okay, so I'm alive, I'm not dead. So that means, okay, I killed 2 people and I have to live with that. And she doesn't immediately go into this, yay, let's all be happy and celebrate. And that has been a thing, like in movies and in books and in stories, like when people just move on and they're not bothered. I'm like, and I do love that. The series that I'm reading right now, there is, I'm in the Blood and Ash series. I'm on the, I finally am now I was rereading the books that I'd read before from the Blood and Ash series to get to the new book, the War of Two Queens. But there is often a point made of, in those characters as well, something terrible happening and them being really bothered. And that idea of like, it would be better if I wasn't bothered. And multiple times it's been called out, like, it's important that we're always bothered by this. Like it's part of what separates us from, the evil, bad people, that death does bother us, that seeing this does bother us. And like the reminder that being able to feel that is good. So poor Feyre. But yeah, for myself, I think that sometimes the idea that, or one of the things that I teach as I'm like, sometimes in some situations, as much as there is like, let's think positive, and I understand that being in a positive mental space is often good, there are situations that we actually want to feel negative about on purpose because that is what feels appropriate to us. And it doesn't mean that we can't also feel happy, like if somebody passes away, but the idea of somebody who we loved really deeply and then not feeling grief or pain or sadness or loss over that, or if we do something where we hurt somebody, like even if we didn't mean to, the idea of feeling positive emotion over that, or watching the news and seeing one of the every other day, twice a day, mass shooting situations happening. I'm like, I don't want to see that and be happy. I want to be horrified. I want to be affected. And I have to watch my emotional balance to see where I'm at. But it's part of the human experience, and it's real, like, to hurt. And so as much as I'm like, I want this beautiful happy ending, I'm like, I would probably respect her less if she was like, yay, we won.
And they lived happily ever after.
Yep. Nope, but she doesn't. So she wakes up and she is struggling. She's really struggling with all of this. But then we've also got things here where she sees his face for the first time. Mm-hmm. So she didn't really know what he looked like until now. But just so much I feel like every other sentence here is just like reality check, like such big things that she's needing to deal with right now.
Yeah. Amarantha's dead. They were free. I was free. Amarantha was dead, and I had killed those two high fae. I had just got these, like, the good and the bad is just flooding into what I had done to get to this moment, to be standing here.
Yeah.
I'm going to shove a Scarlet O'Hara again. I'm going to shove against that thought again. In a minute, an hour, a day, I'll think about that. But
yeah. Which actually, she says that. I was thinking about that. We've had that moment, and she says it again later in the chapter. At some point, there's another at the very, very last line of this is like, tomorrow there would be tomorrow and an eternity to face what I had done, to face what I shredded into pieces inside myself while under the mountain, but kind of not today. And it's interesting. Like, I do think an important part of our process is being able to really embody experiences and process emotions. But again, this is one of those places where we do have a limitation as humans. And sometimes when things are really big, it's too much to do all at once. And there can be wisdom in like pacing ourselves. Whenever I'm doing work with clients or whenever they're looking at facing their past, I'm like, I really encourage people to be careful of like how much, especially if they're doing trauma work, they're doing like inner child healing. I'm like, please do not spend 6 hours like exploring like the most painful memories. Like, it's too much. Like, you actually kind of do need to do it in like little bits of time. And so as much as there's, we've kind of joked about like her Scarlet O'Hara moments, like at this point with this much trauma, I'm like, I actually think there's wisdom in like her actually looking at, oh, okay, so I'm an immortal now and I've got plenty of time. Yeah. I can give myself a little bit of time to unpack this, right? Like, I can give myself time to unpack this. So for those of you listening to the podcast who don't know this, how long ago has it been now? 9 months ago, my husband donated his kidney to a friend of ours who had kidney disease. And so he's in surgery, she's in surgery, so I'm in the waiting room, and his donor's husband. So I'm waiting with the husband of his recipient. Sorry, so he's the donor, she's the recipient. Donor's wife, recipient's husband. We're outside waiting together. And the interesting thing is he's a coach as well, right? So like, we're both aware of this, and it was interesting. I'm like, it would have been a funny thing to kind of just film us and how we walked through this, like both of us stepping into
that would be good
with this awareness. Now, one thing we did was like from the get-go, we just kind of verbalized this is how we handle stuff. So he's like, hey, so this is kind of what I'm going to do. And you'll notice if I'm you will know if I'm really struggling because this is what you're going to see in my behavior. And I'm like, okay, you're going to notice if I'm struggling because I'm not going to be eating, I'm not going to be drinking water, and I'm not going to pee. So I'm like, a way that you can serve me is like, every so often, like check, like, have I eaten? And I'm probably going to say I'm not hungry, and I'm probably going to need protein. And I will not realize I need to go pee. And you probably just need to tell me to go pee. If I have. And so we both just kind of helped out. And everyone's always like, are you hungry? I'm like, not really. He's like, I'm going to go get some chicken. He's like, here's some chicken. I'm like, thanks. So we both went into in this space. But also we had this moment of like, there was so much. Oh my gosh, friend, I don't know if I told you this. And we're sitting there and we get them into surgery, and they have this thing where you can like watch. So we know that they're both in surgery. It started, and we're like, okay, we need to go outside. We need to take a break. And as we're sitting out there was a code red over the alarm thing. It's like, code red, go to this floor. And he and I both just like we just like froze like statues for the longest time. And then we're like, wait, what room, what floor, where are they, what's the thing? But it was like the thing that you're most afraid of. No, it wasn't them.
Yeah, right.
It's a really big hospital.
I'm sure everybody who was there just instantly was like, is that my person?
Which actually we talked to somebody else, and I forget what they said. They're like, usually a code red is not somebody dying. Usually it's like a machine malfunctioning or something catching on fire. I'm like, wait, what? Or whatever it was. But like, it's usually not that big of a deal. But we freaked out. And the emotions were so big. We kind of made this conscious understanding. I think he was the one that said it. He's like, he's like, I understand. He's like, and I know that processing these emotions and working through this and not burying it is important. He's like, but also we do not need to embody the full range of emotional experiences today.
Yeah.
He's like, it's okay if we just get through today and then we embody and process them over the next several weeks. And we both just kind of had that understanding of like, right, we can actually just get through today. We don't have to embody every bit of it because it all has led up to today, and this is going to be the next however many hours. And then we're going to have time and we can go back and we can process it. We can look through and sort it out. We don't have to do it all now. Anyway, so all that to say, there can be a moment when we're just Scarlet over like throw our hands up. I just can't be bothered. And there can also be a wisdom in knowing what we have bandwidth to handle and giving ourselves time and space to work through things in small enough increments that it doesn't overwhelm us.
Yeah.
Yeah, because this was a lot. And this is one of those things where I'm like,
a lot.
I actually feel like this was a healthy choice.
Yeah.
Okay.
I also think it might be a healthy choice if the hospital were to change the code for small things to something besides code red, knowing that there are people in the hospital who are already at the limit and who are going to assume a code red means that their person is doing worse. So
Right.
I'm going
Just gonna throw that out
call
there.
the hospital. If anybody from the hospital is listening,
Can we have a different code? Okay, so she's struggling. Okay, and she just is. So she took a minute, but now she's in this room and she couldn't look away from the truth that sounded in her head with each breath. I'd killed them, slaughtered them. I hadn't even seen their bodies being taken away. Oh. Yeah, and like just kind of looking like some people had fled, some people are celebrating, some people just stood or paced, eyes distant, faces pale, as if they too didn't quite feel like this was real. Really fascinating watching how everybody deals with this differently.
and this is a very real chapter too, because you just kind of assume, especially it's fantasy romance. Like she finally breaks the curse, she comes back to life, and you're gonna go have a love scene, right? Not after sitting through a bunch of boring meetings that she's exhausted and totally like she's got meetings to sit through. Good Lord, that's not fair. I think she should have immediately had a nice love scene and a massage, but
Oh my gosh.
not
Right?
real life. This is probably how it would go down in real life.
Much more realistic. So then we have this one thing that stood out to me. So, he's saying like, what is it? And or like she says, what is it? And she recognizes, she's like, she can tell how hollow her own voice sounds. And this, I should try to sound more cheerful for him. And I was like, no,
Definitely not.
I definitely don't think so.
We're not gonna shit on you for that one, for
I'm
sure.
not gonna shit on
girl.
you. And
You should sound hollow after what you just went through. That is perfectly normal.
it is perfectly normal. But gosh, again, we probably talked about this before too, but how much this idea of like what we should feel, how we should behave, managing other people's emotions. Nope.
Yeah, she goes
helpful.
back into more shoulding.
More
I
shoulding.
should be begging for his forgiveness, begging the families and friends of those fairies for their forgiveness. I should be on my knees, weeping with shame for all that I had done.
Yeah.
Oh, bless her. She's got so much more shame she's gonna have to deal with.
She's got a lot here.
the whole process.
So, and then we come in and he sees she's struggling and he's open to talking about it. And she's like, nope, I don't want to talk about it. And she didn't want to talk about because he was looking at her tattooed arm and she's like, I don't want to talk about it.
that
I don't want to talk
either.
about the bargain.
Nope.
And she's like, this is a small concern compared to the stain on my soul, the pit inside it. And, so this sort of thing. And instead what she moves into is like, she needs a physical moment here. And to convince herself that this is real, and so they have, this really intense physical scene. But again, like true to reality, I'm like, it's, sometimes I joke, I'm like, Yeah, sometimes we need to get back into our bodies, and sometimes that's movement, and sometimes that's exercise, and sometimes that's sex when like that's open to you. But like we talked about before, like what are the places that we can get back to the present moment, and like that very physical experience, like it did put her back in her body, it put her back in the present. Like it was a helpful thing, and I think that often it can be that for a lot of people. And she recognized actually this isn't going to wash away anything that she'd done, but this was to remind herself that things were real because she's really struggling with that right now.
Yeah.
But also to say, if you have a partner,
Useful.
the idea of like, okay, you need to really connect with your physical body.
Useful
This is an
activity.
option.
Yep.
This is an option for doing that.
Fun practice.
Okay, so, all right, so they have this moment, and then she wakes up and she feels a tug at her middle, and it is Rhysand summoning her, and he says it was just to say goodbye. So they have a conversation, and you can tell like the energy here is a little bit different. Like and part of it's she's tired and she's struggling, but there's not the same level of like angst or antagonism here. Like things
She
have really
even
shifted.
says, "What do you want?" It didn't come out with the snap I'd intended. Not as I remembered how he'd fought again and again to attack Amarantha to save me.
Yeah.
So she's not able to have the same intensity of
Yeah.
attitude towards him that she had before.
And she has this moment here, like where she's asking him why. And part of it was, he wanted to be remembered for fighting back, but also he said, because I didn't want you to fight alone or die alone. And she remembers, again, call back to the fairy that had died in the foyer and how she had told Tamlin the same thing. And she recognizes, again, this moment of, and it is very interesting that the same reason that when Tamlin asks her why she would do that for this fairy, she's asking Rhysand, and he's giving like almost the same answer. So they have this is a moment of connection and sameness here. Okay. Oh, and then they have a moment here where again, kind of like in the cell where they had this honest, sort of an honest moment. They have another honest moment here where we see that he's going to fly off, and she gets this moment of like, oh, you didn't tell me that you loved the wings or the flying. And he has a vulnerable moment here of like, everything I love has always had a tendency to be taken from me. So I tell very few about the wings or the flying. And so it's so interesting that if that's the case for him, that he's telling this to her.
Yeah.
So it's building some trust there. And then she has and then she has a moment where she opens up, which again, I think is so interesting, where it usually does in a relationship. It takes one person being willing to be vulnerable first, so the other person feels like they can, and to be the person who's vulnerable first, or like in a group setting, in a coaching setting. Like anytime I've run a group, it's so interesting. The first person to cry always apologizes, and I always thank them. I'm like, somebody has to do it first so that everybody knows it's okay. And like the person who's willing to go to that place and let themselves cry and let themselves be seen and let themselves be vulnerable, it's really what it takes to open up the door. And within a group, like the person who's willing to do that, like I always respect them so much.
Yeah.
And it's important for group dynamics. But so she has this moment where she's kind of wishing that her heart had been made immortal too, because she's like, then maybe she could not care so much.
No. Maybe easier to live with what she had done.
But I love this last line, like, and we talked about this a little already. She's like, I can't tell whether I want it to, because it would be easier to not feel the pain, but there would be something incongruent about that for her. Like the idea of being able to kill somebody and then not feel remorse, like that wouldn't feel right either. And it's interesting because I do think so many of us think that what we want is to feel better and not feel pain. And I don't think that's actually what we want. I don't think that actually works the way that most people think that it's going to work for them. Because the only way you can like not feel pain is either you have to like completely harden your heart to everything. I'm like, or go live in a cave. It's like you open your eyes to the world around you and there's suffering everywhere. So it's like, what are you going to do with that? Like, what do you do with what you see? And like for me, the only thing that feels congruent for me is to choose to be in pain over that. It's just a matter of not letting it consume me.
Yeah.
But I don't want to be happy all the time.
No.
It would be weird.
It would. And then it wouldn't even feel happy because it wouldn't have anything to contrast it against, which that would be weird because then that's just feeling nothing all the time. And that's why Reason says, be glad of your human heart.
Be glad of your human heart.
Pity those who don't feel anything at all.
Yeah. Yep. And I think the distinction that I've always made is like the difference between pain and suffering. And I'm like, there is normal human pain is healthy. And it's when it becomes, I think, self-directed and when we're pain or shame or guilt or whatever over our pain. If that made any sense.
I followed.
You followed on if
anybody else did.
But pain versus suffering. And sometimes I'm articulate and can define that really well. The words are slipping me. We've done so many podcast episodes today. But there is a difference between pain and suffering. And like pain is a normal part of being a human being. And it's not a thing that we need to get rid of.
Right.
Yeah. And I don't know. I'm like, it was presented to me once that like emotional balance is life being about 50-50. And I'm like, yeah, it makes sense to me. About 50% of the time it's going to be positive emotion. And about 50% of the time it's going to be negative. And
wow.
Yeah.
I don't know if that's, I don't know if I
don't like that.
I don't like that.
Here's the thing. I didn't like it either. And the first time it was presented to me that it's supposed to be 50-50, I was like, I completely disagree with this. I completely disagree with it. But I thought about it for a long time. And again, I'm one of those people that really, I was like, okay. I kind of like in the movie The Matrix, where the Oracle is like what she's saying. It's not necessarily about like what she's saying, but it's about like, what did you need to hear? And I was like, okay, so what if I like Matrix Oracle this teaching? And I'm like, okay. If I believe that the goal is 50-50, then if I have days whenever it's about that, I'm not going to also heap on top of it the idea that something has gone wrong. If it's only supposed to be 50-50, then on days whenever things are low, I can have the thought of, so this is normal. This is how it's supposed to be. I don't heap all of that additional suffering on it that something's gone wrong. And then I actually end up being at a different emotional balance. Because if you look at people who it's when their negative outweighs the positive, a lot of times I ask people like, and I'll have them chart out like what percentage of the time they feel positive, what percentage of the time they feel negative, and then what they think it's supposed to be. And one of the things that I understand about suffering, talking about the difference between pain and suffering, that the thing that causes the most suffering for us, or one thing that causes a lot of suffering for humans, is the belief that we should be happier than we are. And I believe that's Byron Katie who said that. So no matter what our level of happiness is, whenever we believe that we are supposed to be happier than we are, that's when we suffer. And so if we believe life's supposed to be 80-20, and yet we're experiencing a 60-40, we believe something's gone wrong, then we judge our experience, and then we end up being way off, because then suddenly every negative emotion feels like part of the problem, which then we judge and feel bad about, and then suddenly we've tripled our negative emotions and we end up so far out of balance, where whenever negative emotions show up, if we're like, oh, it's part of how it's supposed to be, we're only supposed to be about 50-50, then we don't judge them and we actually end up in a higher positive to negative ratio. I usually show this on a chart and a whiteboard and it makes more sense. But
also, yin and yang symbol comes to mind for me. I'm like, well, yin and yang is 50-50.
It is.
And I have a whole other conversation that I want to have about that right now, but it includes spoilers for book 2. So I'm going to put a pin in it and come back to this conversation.
Put it on the list. Yeah, for sure. But that was an interesting thing about happiness in general. Like one of the things, like there's so much talk in our like society about being happy and people want to be happy. And when you actually study it from like a psychology point of view, when people set out to be happier, that is the thing that makes them the most unhappy, because the whole idea is based on that there is something wrong right now which then makes them judge their experience, which then doubles or triples their negative emotion, which leads to them being less happy than if they're able to look at what's going on right now and believe that it's perfect. Like if you can look at like whatever your emotional experience is right now and really get to the place of believing there is not a problem, your happiness will be like your happiness, your positive to negative ratio will be higher than if you believe there's something that needs to be fixed.
Yeah.
So I like the thought of like, okay, it's only supposed to be 50-50. So then whenever I have a day where things are rough or a week when things are rough, my thought is just, oh, this is part of my -50 and it's totally normal.
Yeah.
And then I
If it
just,
needs to be 50-50, I need to have a lot more bad days.
right.
Because I don't have bad days. That I'm like, I don't have 50-50. I have like 90-10. And I hate the 10, but I know that it helps the 90 feel even better when it comes back.
Yeah.
But geez, if we're aiming for 50-50, I
Yeah.
need to purposely
Be
plan
my-
some bad days.
But that's the point. Like, actually, yes.
Yeah.
And here's the thing. I actually do, because this is what I've learned is like, if we want to be happy 90% of the time, yeah, because there's going to be stuff that happens in life. There are going to be like the dog. Okay, this is just so morbid. Like the dog's going to get run over. Our kids are going to get sick. Like there's a certain amount of just stuff that's going to happen that's going to create pain. But if the goal is to feel happy most of the time, we're going to do our best to avoid everything else. But we just talked about how painful cycle breaking is.
Yeah.
Growth, setting goals. Like whenever I set a big goal, it's like, okay, I'm going to do this thing and I'm going to evolve into the next version of myself. That is pain. And as soon as I decide I'm going to do something else, I know I'm going to get hit with a wave of imposter syndrome,
Oh, yeah.
of like nausea level. It's like, I'm going to do this thing in the world. I'm going to be more visible. This is going to cause negative emotion. And that was the difference for me of like, when I actually apply this and believe that life is supposed to be 50-50, it's not about avoiding the pain. It's about choosing my negative on purpose.
I love that.
So I'm over my negative being self-judgment and self-shaming and playing small and worrying about what other people are thinking of me. And I'm still going to have 50% negative, but it's going to be about my clients and the person who's out there who doesn't know that they're enough, and they are on their kitchen floor and eating ice cream and crying alone in their bedroom because they don't know that they're enough. That breaks my heart, but I pick that. I will pick that negative, and it's still negative emotion, but that's one that I choose. I'll choose the negative and the imposter syndrome and the growth. And like right now I'm in this season of like such deep self-awareness where like I look at myself and I'm like, good God, has that been there the whole time? Right? And I'm like, I didn't realize I had such like, I'd sort of like lied to myself of like not wanting to see the dark stuff, but really exploring like our shadow self. And I'm like, God, there's like ego and like, pettiness and like all of these things. And they're in there, and being honest with myself about that so I can evolve to the next version of myself. I'm like, I will choose that. But it's the hard that I pick, and it's the 50% negative that I pick that's in service to the next version of myself and that's in service to humanity. I'm just not willing to sit around feeling negative because, oh my gosh, what did so-and-so think of me? And am I underdressed for this thing? Or, questioning my worth and my value and my enoughness and putting myself in a different category. And like, oh my gosh, is my ass saggy? Who the hell cares? I don't have the capacity to have negative emotion over a saggy ass at this point, when there are people who don't know that they have value. Both hurt. Both create negative emotion for me. I'm just picking my 50.
So good.
Sorry, I got a little ranty there.
That was amazing. Such a good rant.
Sometimes I get a little preachy.
It's not preaching. Preaching. What's so good? I've never heard that concept before. I just love it.
Yeah, so this chapter though of, I just think the amount of suffering that we all create for ourselves by trying to be happy. I'm like, let's be done with it. Let's just pick the negative that serves us and like let it be, and like let it be part of humanity. Because people show up, they're like, I want to be happier. I'm like, I'm probably not the right coach for you. I'm like, I'm not about like helping you feel happy. I'm like, if you're open to, I'm like, what I am for is helping you open yourself up to the full range of emotions that are human and learning to love yourself through every bit of that experience and still feel negative about stuff that matters and just drop this other like self-shaming stuff. Like I'm about all that, but like at the end of it, I'm not saying you're going to feel better. I'm just saying you're going to feel different. You're going to feel negative about different things that are going to serve you more and serve humanity more. But the pursuit of let's feel less negative. Now, again, like there are some people where it's like it's so far out of balance, and that's different. When it's like, man, I feel positive maybe 10% of the time. I'm like, okay, we've got some distortions. But like even then, most people, I'm like, okay, what if you just, like if I ask somebody what their positive to negative ratio is, and they're like, okay, I maybe feel negative, 70, 80% of the time, and I feel positive, 20 or 30. I'm like, okay, if you stopped judging your experience, if you stopped thinking that negative emotions were a problem in the first place, where would you be? And almost like most of the time, if we take out the judgment of our experience, the belief that we should be happier than we are, most people are already at 50-50.
Wow.
Because usually 2/3 of the negative emotions that they're feeling is, so they judge their experience and then they judge themselves as bad or wrong for having the experience. So it's like, I felt this. Okay, so that's one. And then it's, I shouldn't be feeling that judgment. And then what's wrong with me for feeling that? It's literally 2/3 of the negative emotions that most people feel are judgment of the situation and judgment of themselves. And if both of those are dropped, most people's emotional balance is fine. Fixed.
Wow.
And that's why most of my work right now, so much of my work right now is not about being happier. It's about, I joke, I'm like, what it can teach you how to do is human better.
Human better.
And it involves pain. It's part of the human experience. And I love that she's able to see that she wasn't sure that she wanted to get rid of it. I'm like, don't, Feyre.
Yeah.
Don't get rid of it. Okay. All right. So then we've got back to the books. Back to the book. Okay. Weird moment where Rhysand says goodbye. He bows and then suddenly goes rigid. His eyes locks. His nostrils flare. Shock, pure shock, flashes across his face. He stumbles back a step, actually stumbled. And again, this is in the midst of the scariest, most messed up situations, is cool as a cucumber, stumbles, and then just disappears.
Not at all weird.
Not at all weird. Leading to something that's happening later, but we're like, what was that? But I remember for like reading that and like really spending time trying to figure out what that was.
Don't try to figure it out.
Don't try to figure it out.
Figure it out.
I had one guess. It was wrong. Okay. So that's their goodbye. And then they leave through the cave tunnels to go back to the spring court.
I love this moment because this is really important to me. In entertainment, it's always so important to me that the villains have some kind of humanity, some kind of compassion. So I'm like, okay, okay. Now we've seen Rhysand the monster. We've seen his vulnerable side. We've seen that he has pain from this and he's had pain from. We see that. But Amarantha, she's still. And then it was like through Feyre's eyes that I was able to see it, because she says, as much as I wanted to hate her, as much as I wished I could have spat on her burning body, I understood what had driven her. A very small part of her, but I understood it. And then I played that back. I'm like, oh yeah, well, her sister that she loved was,
I mean, yeah, she's
tortured and killed brutally by the man that she loved. So that could turn someone very dark and evil when you have something very dark and evil happen to someone that you love that much. So that is understandable. Yeah.
Yeah. I love that part. I had marked that before, but missed it. But yeah, and we talked about this before as well, where having an understanding doesn't excuse behavior.
Yeah. It's definitely not okay, but
it doesn't.
Feyre can't just hate her and spit on her body, and she's like, wow.
Right. Oh my gosh, this reminds me. So Zoe, my eldest daughter, is a writer. She has written I think anybody out there who's a writer, like it might actually just make you feel bad to understand like how many words the girl has written over the last, I mean, just prolific. And she does know that writing new stories is more fun than going back and editing old ones. She does usually have to, she does have to be a little, but she will, what am I trying to say? She will schedule in editing. She does make sure she shows up for the hard stuff as well, but she writes a lot. And she loves storytelling. She loves character creation, but she is absolutely obsessed with villain backstories.
You love villain backstories. Yeah, that's why she loved Cruella so much.
It's why she loved Cruella. Yep. So the idea of like what leads a person to be there, and that deep understanding of how a person can get to that point of cruelty and seeing the humanity and seeing the understanding. Like she's just fascinated by it. Also, too, a lot of her writing is tragedies. I don't know why, but she's like, ooh, I wrote this story, and then she tells me about it. I'm like, that's so sad. She's like, I know, like I'm like, I love you so much. I'm so proud of your writing. I'm never reading any of your stuff because I like happy endings, child, happy endings. Yeah, but to have this, yeah, because again, but I mean, life is like very few people really are truly just evil, and the ability to go back and really, again, that understanding and acceptance of, can I understand how a person got here? But yeah, to have this backstory where I don't know that Amarantha was ever really stable, or it doesn't seem like she was ever really
she wasn't
good
really
person
sweet before that, I'm sure, but
no. But I agree too. But I love understanding characters' backstories, and as much as like we don't see it as much in this book, and without necessarily giving something away, we talked, I think, all the way back in the very first episode, and even back when we did our interview with Erin, that one of the things that this author is known for is morally gray characters, but always in a way that really lets you explore choices. I mean, we saw that with Feyre, like this decision of having, like, killing two fairies to free all of Printhia, and like we understand, and yet also not okay, and like that's definitely one of those like morally gray things. And so I love the way this author continues to explore this. But this moment for Feyre, and she's like, it's just this teeny tiny part. It's just this teeny tiny part. But I understood. Yeah, I liked that moment. I liked that moment as well. Okay. So the breath is knocked from her chest when she beheld the rose-covered manor. In all my imaginings, I'd never allowed myself to think of this moment. Never allowed myself to dream that outrageously.
But I'd made it. I'd brought us both home. I love that. It's so nice to have a Shiro. Just like, I brought us both home. Oh, God bless her. She did it.
I made an Instagram.
He didn't rescue her. She
rescued him. Yeah. And again, this idea, again, this theme of like, we don't know the future. Dreaming small, dreaming big.
Yeah. She
all
never
the things.
let herself think so outrageously of like just seeing her home again.
And yet it happened. And the idea that like the fact that she couldn't imagine it, the fact that she couldn't let herself think of it, didn't mean it wasn't in the cards for her.
Yeah.
Yeah. I made an Instagram reel the other day that was just some version of like, I've decided to stop trying to predict the future because apparently I'm bad at it. That was it. It wasn't a teaching. It was just an announcement to the world.
Turns out
I'm not very good at predicting the future. But it's a good reminder that sometimes the future does hold things that are more outrageously wonderful than we could imagine. Which is a fun note to end on in the midst of, or to almost end on in the midst of all of this. Yeah, and this last passage was the one that I had referred to earlier, yes, that there would be tomorrow, and yeah, she's going to process that. But so we'll go back to this other one. Like at the end of everything, she she ends up with more than she thought possible.
And Lucian calling them into dinner. So, just love them. Lucian's now the mother hen calling them into dinner. And then they went home. End of book 1.
Oh my gosh, I can't believe we're saying end of book 1.
End of book 1 means
beginning of book 2. Oh my gosh. Okay, like I said, I kind of want to go back, and we may do some other episodes. We haven't decided, guys, where like we might look at like all of book 1. But what I will say is, yeah, again, with this author, like I do feel like it really does just like write, book 2 like picks up, because obviously we see right here there's a lot of stuff she hasn't dealt with.
Oh yeah.
She just went through this thing, and like as an author who's not just like, oh, let's wrap it up in a bow and pretend like everybody's happy. Like she's struggling. Book 2, we do get to see what she does with all of that. Yeah, I'm excited to talk about it, but I can't believe we did it though. We are all the way through this book. I don't know how many episodes it took us to get here, but
We made it.
gosh, it was a blast.
It was. Thanks for watching, guys. And if you haven't already, now is the perfect time, now that we are done with the whole book 1 and get ready to start on book 2 soon, to get on over to our community on Circle. You can find that at ACOTA, that's ACOTAA.circle.so, where we have the podcasts and discussions and fan chats and fun stuff, along with group journeys where we get more vulnerable and make Feyre's journey our own journey and see how we can do some kick-ass cycle breaking in our own lives. We'd love to see you over there, and we will see you soon for book 2. Until then,
Bye.